One time for the one time, two time for the two time. Welcome home, stars them. You are tapped back in with Northstar Politics, pushing political imagination. You are, of course, joined online by myself, Noah East, the Myland Malcolm X. We didn't land on Bethnal Green. Bethnal Green landed on us. That little boy from Bo E3, Slimitar Herbertov live in the flesh, John O'Shea Guevara. I'm a little new one for them. I'm, of course, joined by Sean Ramiz on each and every platform.
Yes, that's me. Sorry. Was there a delay? Was I meant to say something? Yeah.
The delay is killing us. The Enfield Eric Williams, Biblical Jesus, half socialist, half socialist, DreamWorks Moses.
Let my people go. Yes, wagwan alaikum alaikum wagwan to the viewers at home. We are online this week, as Noah said, just by chance actually, so it's good it all synced up. But even though we're online, make sure you're liking, commenting, subscribing. Let us know where you are based as well. That's actually always a good one, you know, because it catches us off guard. But yeah, Noah, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, bro. It's annoying that you can't really see my background. I know our producer Tarek, when he sees this, is going to get annoyed about the lighting. But behind me is the Caribbean Sea. I'm in the Bahamas at the moment. Sean, you're somewhere similar?
Yeah, I'm actually at yard right now. I'm joking. I'm not at yard. I'm not that up. Basically, for work, they sent us to, because I work in the charity sector, like I mentioned before, they sent us to Edinburgh this week because there is the largest link up of all charitable organizations in Scotland. So yeah, I'm in Edinburgh. I'm surprised they gave me a nice Airbnb, you know. I don't know if any Plinthers, because that's where I work, Plinth is a startup, are watching this, but they cut corners a lot. So I'm so shocked that they actually sent me to a good place for once.
How's your week been?
No, it's been really good. Great response to last week's episode. I'm glad we took a bit more of a serious approach, and it was good that it paid off. It was good that people understood where we were coming from as well. I think this week has been spectacular, actually, because I actually got humbly invited to do a lecture back at Oxford, the Oxford University, in front of the Oxford Islamic Society. And it's crazy because, look, I've been Muslim for 3 years now. And if you told me 3 years ago, I'd be there. I'd be a Muslim talking about that as on a sort of stage in Oxford, in a lecture hall in front of 100+ Muslims. I'd be telling you that's an absolute lie. But yeah, very grateful to see the turnout, and big fans of Northstar Politics. And I'm sure me and Noah will be doing more lectures soon. In fact, invite us, please. We got a lot of thoughts and ideas, and we'd love to have the opportunity to do that.
We've got a few things planned already for in-person stuff. A few people have reached out to us to do some live events, so keep posted for that. Also, there's a perfect time to say that people that are supporting us financially, if you head to northstarpolitics.com/support, you will be first to hear about any live events that Northstar Politics does. So if just supporting the boys wasn't incentive enough, there's also a little bit of a opportunity there. Today, we've got some broad topics to get into. We're going to look at the fallout from the Epstein files. Obviously, people will know there's been a lot of fallout in the UK. We'll look at the downfall of McSweeney and the not as of yet downfall of Keir Starmer and some of the media coverage around that. We're going to have a look at the recent elections in Japan and Portugal. And also we're going to have a on-the-ground report from Cuba. So very exciting stuff.
No, good. But just before we kind of get into all of that, no, you didn't say how you were, man. How are you? Trying to just slide past that real quick.
And I'm doing all right, man. I'm in the Bahamas, little work trip, just getting by, really. Missing London. I saw something today that said it rained every day in London this year.
No, it's every day in the UK, but that doesn't really mean much.
Who knows, innit? But I'm doing all right, pretty normal, just getting by.
No, come on, man.
Should we get to the state of play?
Yes, we do. But I do want to just quickly, just gas people up for the upcoming North Stars. We got some exciting guests in the pipeline, but I won't say too much.
Yeah. You know, every time we do a week online, we got to just pay back the stars then with some guests coming. So they will worry. Like, we're going to pay you back for this week online.
Just hella
we appreciate you always for staying tuned in.
Cool. Welcome back to the State of Play. And this is where we update everyone on the current state of politics and current affairs globally and at home. So we're going to kick off with an update on the Epstein files. And the most recent development is that the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform is now being allowed to read the unredacted Epstein files for the first time. Now, the purpose of this is not some sort of criminal trial. It's not about retrying anything that's happened in the past. Rather, it's about the accountability of how this is all been unfolding, determining whether any federal agencies failed to act on known evidence, which powerful individuals were shielded. It's about public disclosure, so deciding, what can be lawfully released to the public, were those decisions actually made in a fair way. And it's also about pressure and reform to actually force further unredactions. So structurally, this is very much the legislator in the US, the House of Representatives, the House Committee versus the DOJ, Department of Justice, because they are basically a further branch of the executive, i.e. Donald Trump. And the interesting thing to kick off this whole saga is that Ghislaine Maxwell was the first to face a US congressional hearing on Epstein from prison. And as expected, she pleaded the fifth, which basically means refused to answer any question that was asked on her. And the Democrats on the committee say that Maxwell was basically just using the opportunity to campaign for clemency, which basically means, so she wants Trump to use his presidential powers to reduce or eliminate the consequences of her crime. So not basically, grant her absolute freedom, just to kind of reduce it. And in return, her lawyer has come on social media to say that she is actually prepared to speak fully and honestly if she is granted that clemency. So again, Ghislaine Maxwell is prepared to apparently speak honestly about Epstein if she is granted clemency by Trump. So the big question now is that, is it actually worth her having a more lenient sentence for her to tell the truth? Well, the actual Democrats on the House committee say absolutely not. We should not grant her clemency. And also that, the importance of basically centering the victims in all this is to say that the actual victims say absolutely not. She should not be granted clemency. So Noah, thoughts on that?
I think it would be a sorry state of affairs to see Ghislaine Maxwell granted clemency, because I guess from my perspective, what that would do is reinforce this pattern of the elite being able to leverage law to their benefit over and over again, and not being subject to the same sort of long arm of the law as the average person would be.
And exculpate that basic accountability that everyone else is afforded.
Exactly. And even if you see that the co-locutors here are Ghislaine Maxwell and Donald Trump, both who are obviously Ghislaine Maxwell far more, but are deeply implicated with regards to their connections to Epstein.
I mean, it's all guesswork at this point, but what do you think? I guess, what do you think will happen? Because I think just on the one hand, I think a lot of people like to watch us because we kind of break down the kind of frameworks that people use in their decision making. And obviously Trump, given this opportunity, is going to think to himself, so how is this going to benefit me? I find it strange that I don't really know how, in what possible world there will be a benefit to Trump if Ghislaine Maxwell talks, because obviously he's deeply implicated in all of this.
No, precisely. And the fact that there is it's kind of hard because one, I don't think Ghislaine Maxwell should be granted clemency, but I also think that I wouldn't want to pursue what's in Trump's best interest, but they happen to be aligned in that sense. So no, I don't think Trump will be granting Ghislaine Maxwell clemency because he has plausible deniability as to why not to do that. We've already been able to see from the DOJ redactions, then unredactions of Trump's name and files going up that implicated Trump and then coming down, that he's willing to do as much as he can to try and suppress any information around his links to Epstein as possible. Also, just for the stars, because in the break, sure, let me know that I'm a bit more monotone in this podcast because I'm in a public area, but I'm risking it all. People are sat around me, but I'll let them know what I think about their files.
Exactly, because you're in Bahamas as well, and Bahamas is just a bunch of
Trust me.
dodgy people there. Some people call it the Dubai of the Caribbean. I definitely agree with that.
I've got my thoughts. When I go back to London, I'll give everyone my thoughts on the Bahamas.
But yeah, we're going to keep updated with that story because a lot will be unraveling. Maybe even by the time we post this, there's going to be more information about what happens there. But one of the interesting things from all of this is actually the fallout in the UK. So we're going to focus on Keir Starmer. So Keir Starmer said he's not prepared to walk away as he fights for his political survival. So you might have seen this in the headlines. Let's kind of break down the timeline of how we got there to him making this emphatic statement. So the suggestion that Keir Starmer would step down as Prime Minister started floating around after Peter Mandelson himself, someone named in the Jeffrey Epstein files, also a best friend of Jeffrey Epstein, had to step down from his appointed House of Lords peerage and also US ambassador due to his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. And then recently, Morgan McSweeney, who was Keir Starmer's main special advisor, I guess the Dominic Cummings to Boris Johnson.
And chief of staff.
chief of staff, was also a protege to Peter Mandelson, and he also stepped down, saying that it was actually his decision to reinstate Mandelson as ambassador to the US. So he took responsibility for that. And in the classic kind of British politics sense, there's always needs to be a fall guy. He was the fall guy for that decision. Also, Tim Allen, Starmer's communications director, also recently stepped down. So as we can see, what Starmer is doing is trying to give a signal to the media, a signal to the wider public that his team has fundamentally changed by ridding himself of this, I guess, baggage, if you want to call them that. Interestingly, Anas Sarwar, who is the leader of the Labour Party in Scotland, actually publicly called for Starmer to step down as well. Again, some people are actually saying this move might have backfired, because in response to all of this, there's actually been a flurry of support for Starmer, with a stream of supportive statements from current sitting Labour MPs. And recently, Starmer held a parliamentary Labour Party meeting, so that's just for the MPs and people who are part of Parliament, and stated that he has won every fight he has been in. Now, under the underlying thing behind all of this is people are thinking, well, why did Anas Sarwar, think this was the moment to kind of, I guess, overthrow Starmer? Why did he do this in the first place? Well, apparently, that call was actually coordinated by Wes Streeting, so the current health secretary of the government, who we've also pointed to as being a Wasio, but the next person who wants to take over Starmer. And Wes Streeting has also recently said in private that Israel has been committing war crimes. And the reason why that's so important is because he recently leaked a bunch of information and text messages with Mandelson to show that actually he was very different to him. And also he's taken a very different stance to the current government, even though if we just kind of roll back the clocks to late 2023, he was just falling in line supporting the genocide in Gaza. So Noah, how do we just make sense of all the kind of chaos that's going down? And
I mean,
what's going to happen to Keir Starmer?
So I think do you remember the prediction I made a few weeks ago before the Epstein files dropped, when it was the disputes around Andy Burnham standing in Gorton and Denton? I think my prediction's still on the cards, where I said they'll block Andy Burnham. Then post May elections, the May council elections, Labour will lose loads of seats to Reform, and at that point there'll be a leadership election, and Angela Rayner will ascend to the premiership. I'm still on board with that.
So you're backing Angela Rayner, yeah?
Well, I'm not personally backing her. I think
she would be the one who.
Yeah, I think that's still where we'd go. But it also kind of is the thing that kind of rested the balance or hangs in the balance is the court findings on her not paying tax on that house on the South Coast. But anyway, that's besides the point. We're just keeping track of my predictions. So I think the past week of political fallout and media response to the Epstein file revelations around Peter Mandelson have been honestly insane. So one, Wes Streeting leaked his own messages with Peter Mandelson to try and distance himself from this, because he recognises of the Labour top brass, he is one of the most deeply implicated. There's countless pieces of evidence of him saying, essentially, Peter Mandelson's my hero, my mum loves him, we were out campaigning together in North Ilford, X, Y, and Z. So that's one. Wes Streeting, as in, he's scrambling for his political survival, and what he's going to look to do is try and suppress the issue of Peter Mandelson's link to Epstein as much as possible. He won't find it very difficult to do so, because the British media elite is fully in hoc with this kind of strategy. I don't know if you saw, Sean, but I think it was the Times did a profile on Peter Mandelson recently, like a softball profile of him cooking in his Wiltshire home, talking about, I've made some bad decisions, this and the third. It's astounding.
And it's trying to sanitize his image.
Trying to sanitize his image at the same time as sort of plainclothes detectives are raiding his house in Camden on Regent's Park. So I think, but worth bearing in mind that it won't be as big a fallout as we expect, because all of the powers that be that have leverage to sort of shine a light on the corruption or sort of malpractice in politics are also sort of in bed with the Mandelson class, with the Epstein class. So I think that's worth bearing in mind. On what this means for Keir Starmer, I think Keir Starmer's a sitting duck anyway. People are just waiting for their time to shoot. So, for example, Angela Rayner. We know Angela Rayner has been on manoeuvres to try and depose Keir Starmer for the best part of the past 6 months. Wes Streeting also. He's now been put on the back foot by his links to Mandelson, but these people are just waiting for the right time. Anna Sarwar on Monday morning coming out and saying that it's the right time for Keir Starmer to resign. Also, Lord Glassman, who's of the Blue Labour faction, coming out and saying that the new Labour co-option of the Labour Party, of the Parliamentary Labour Party, is sort of the cause of all of this this fallout, there's calls coming from different pockets of the Labour Party, obviously Auntie Diane Abbott as well, making her sentiments clear. But I think it will either be the Gorton and Denton by-election, which I expect them to lose to, unfortunately, I'm going to have to say Reform at the moment, or the May
I
elections.
agree with that.
Yeah, or the May elections, which will be the eventual downfall of Keir Starmer.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's quite, I'm definitely aligned with a lot of what you said there. I think one of the interesting things that came to mind for me is that this obviously confirms something that everyone knows all the time, is that politicians are basically just in it for themselves. The thing that gets them moving, the thing that gets them motivated to change their minds or have any basic form of principle is if it's worth their own, if it's worth the furthering of their own career. And that is basically laid bare by the fact that it took the real prospect of becoming prime minister or deposing Keir Starmer to make West Streeton speak up against a genocide. Like, he wasn't willing to do that 2 years ago. He wasn't willing to do that a year ago. He wasn't willing to do that at all. In fact, he's basically just sort of whispering it behind the scenes, maybe over his WhatsApp text, but actually to take a principled stance. The only thing that has made him want to do that is the fact that, one, his own credibility is getting undermined by his close connections with Mandelson, because, again, he was very close with Peter Mandelson, and two, because he saw some actual sort of real chance to be able to seize this moment and this be the critical juncture that actually means that Keir Starmer steps down. And that sort of continuous display of hypocrisy and lack of principle honestly just makes me very, very hopeless about the state of political affairs. And I really don't understand, or really don't even know, how anyone can be associated with Labour anymore, or even have some sort of association at the very minimum with this government. Because especially when we kind of center, again, Gaza and the genocide, it's like, of course, political debate and discussion is part of our social contract, it's part of what we do in politics. But these were red lines that people literally crossed. And if anything's on the table, then the next time that there's some sort of significant political gain that they can make, if they need to trade up your own rights, trade up your own personal rights, trade up any sort of valuable human rights that we have, what's to say that there's any sort of democratic safeguards against that, apart from their own sort of political will and the incentive to do
even
so.
then, there isn't. You maybe say like the safeguard is that their own political conscience or their intellectual capacity, but clearly that isn't even a safeguard, because Wes Streeting, and this is how low the bar is, he has knowingly exposed the fact that he, to repeat myself, knowingly supported a government that was aiding and abetting a genocide. That's what these texts prove. But he recognizes that the level of political cynicism and apathy is such that he can expose that about himself, and it will be to his benefit because of other things going on in the background.
But that's the thing. It's always a means to an end for these people. It's never an end in itself. Like, those texts are him saying, "Oh, by the way, there's a genocide here, and we really need to call it out because it's going to hamper the growth of the Labour Party, not because it's a genocide." It didn't stop there, and I think that is just even basically sort of validated even more why we started this Northstar project, because these politicians still need to be held to account. And by the way, they haven't been held to account at all. Even if reform come in, even if reforms sweep in, that is no meaningful accountability, because what we're talking about here and what the Epstein files on a broader level exposes is that there's a problem with the political class. It doesn't matter if it's Labour, it doesn't matter if it's Reform, it's these types of political agents and actors who, I guess are just in it for themselves.
No, precisely. Like, I think as well, a lot of these sort of cynical political agents benefit from that strategic lowering of the bar and lowering the sort of the scrutiny that's placed on politicians. Like, there's a clip that we reposted on our social media platforms where me and you 4 months ago were speaking about how there was wrongdoing by Morgan McSweeney on not disclosing £700,000 worth of donations to the Labour Party. We then bring in the fact that he was mentored by Peter Mandelson, and that Peter Mandelson was quote unquote best pals with Jeffrey Epstein. This is 4 months ago. Like, me and Sean are no sleuths. We're no undercover detectives, but they're just very easy and plain to find for anyone. And what we're seeing now is that Keir Starmer is maintaining his position in power by claiming, "Oh, they lied to me, this and the third." why are you hiring anyone to the most senior position in British diplomacy, being the ambassador to the United States, if it is public record that the Northstar boys can find out that he was best pals with the most notorious paedophile in modern history? Why are you
Also,
doing that?
there's so much plausible, like there's so much like supposed plausible deniability and people denying that they knew anything. But what you have to understand is that whatever industry you're in, yeah, like this political class and this political elitism and the brushing shoulders of these elites, right? They know what's going on. Obviously, you can't prove it. Right. But it's very similar to just having a sort of friend group in your university year. Like people know what's happening behind the scenes. They know things about people that they don't even know. And it's just so hard to believe. And so, do they actually think that we are stupid, that we would actually believe these lies, that they had absolutely no idea what Mandelson was on? It's bizarre.
It's the push. It's the push for the idea that there is no alternative. That's how people become apathetic. We know they knew better.
Yeah.
We know they understood that. But it's like, well, what can we do? It feels like
Yeah.
there's no leverage to do anything. It's like, maybe you want to put allegedly, and we'll ask Tarek to put a disclaimer in the description, but it's like, Keir Starmer, you knew that he was best friends with a paedophile. How do I know you knew that? Because I knew. I did a quick Google search. Alistair Campbell, you knew this. All of you people,
Yeah.
you knew these things.
Yeah, it's bizarre. And sort of staying on that topic around Labour, I actually want to give a quick update on the Filton24, which is some sort of good news and some sort of silver lining. And I'm actually getting goosebumps saying this, but 6 members of the Filton24 were found not guilty on all accounts of aggravated burglary, criminal damage, and violent disorder. So 5 of them were even granted bail, and actually some returned to their families. And just a reminder that these were the group of Palestine Action protesters, like the original group, who carried out direct action against a drone factory in Bristol. And that particular drone factory were the suppliers of quadcopter drones to the Israeli occupation, which was, I don't know if you remember the sinister story of the sound that the IDF used to lure out Palestinians, which from women and children from certain areas, and then they just ended up kind of getting lured into their own massacre. These were what the quadcopter drones were used for. And obviously it's huge news. It's great to sort of see that this is like, it's really just good news amongst like a flurry of bad news. Interestingly though, the CPS have actually called for a retrial on some of the charges where no verdict was reached. And to be fair, that is usually expected during a hung jury. So on some accounts it was a hung jury, but when it is a hung jury, they are effectively not guilty on all accounts. And the difference is at this time, which is really weird, but the CPS broke precedents and actually came to social media to announce that they are going to a retrial. So people are questioning, well, what is going on behind the scenes that have kind of forced this, what seems to be or is perceivedly a kind of quote unquote neutral state organization to come and actually engage in online discourse and show that actually they're fighting back against the Filton24, and it suggests basically that there's a lot of lobbying going on behind the scenes, but again, allegedly, Tariq can put again in the red text, allegedly going on
all over the place. No, I think that it's a good reminder of people
yeah.
as well that these supposedly like neutral institutions of government, they are just like an organization of people who will have their particular biases, oftentimes like inherent biases in the line of work they go into.
Yeah. And if people want to follow up more information on that, just we shouted out the page before, but Prisoners for Palestine is a good one. And I believe it's free, the Filton24 on Instagram. So yeah, that kind of rounds off some of the UK news I wanted to cover this week. Noah, do you want to take us a bit internationally?
Yeah, let's where should we head first? I'll give you an option: Japan, Portugal, or Cuba.
I've always wanted to go to Japan, so let's start off with
Should
Japan.
go Japan first. Okay, so maybe the most pessimistic of, well, actually, no. But anyway, so Japan recently had a snap election last week, start this week, 8th February, to choose all 465 seats in its House of Representatives, which is the more powerful lower chamber in Japan, so they have a bicameral system. The election took place just after the current Prime Minister, Sanai Takaichi, hopefully I'm pronounced that right, became Prime Minister in October 2025. So she is the incumbent, but then there's been a snap election called, and her Liberal Democratic Party, the LDP, won a landslide victory, securing 316 out of the 465 seats, the largest seat total for any party in Japan's post-war history. And it gives them a 2/3 supermajority, which will allow them, similar to some other constitutional states around the world, to modify the post-World War II constitution if they see fit. So put in brief, right-wing party, conservative party in Japan, already in power as of October 2025, but in a recent snap election has now gained even more power and even greater mandate to pursue their sort of conservative, anti-immigration and quite militaristic policies. So to sort of frame who Sanae Takaichi is in her policy, she's very much aligned with Donald Trump. She is very much anti-China, has indicated that she would help defend Taiwan, but to further sort of frame her anti-China sort of perspective or stance, she got in a lot of trouble with the Chinese diplomats in her premiership for having visited the Yasukuni Shrine, where there's 2.5 million war dead are honoured, but there's also Japanese war criminals honoured there. And she has basically signalled that she is going to reincorporate into Japanese culture and sort of civic life a lot of these sort of principles that led to these war crimes. She's also on like a more fundamental level committed to doubling the 2022 levels of GDP expenditure on defence to the Donald Trump requisite of 2% by March, so doubling in defence spending within a couple months. And she's also looking to like have a crackdown on immigration and even tourism in Japan. So,
so my astute analysis. Yeah, so my astute analysis is that she's just kind of batshit crazy, like all these other kind of far right loonies, or is that wrong?
I mean, you know, it's funny sometimes to like throw them out like that, but in reality, he's quite a savvy operator. Like Japan has a very different political history to a lot of other parts of, let's maybe say like Pacific islands and Pacific countries. And I think deep within Japan is a nationalism, and oftentimes similar to Canada in a lot of ways. If I could put this out there, Japan in its like Western presentation is not framed accurately. I think maybe tourism and post-World War II pacifism, like enforced pacifism post-World War II, has allowed Japan to develop an image for itself in the Western world as quite a docile and moderate nation by our standards. But in fact, it has a very fervent nationalistic temperament, which I think is being like reignited by Takaichi.
Yeah, and I think in the way in which they sort of adopt and posture towards the West, you can see that they're inheriting a lot of these, I suppose, far right. Like there's a lot of patterns, really, and patterns of similarities between the discourse that the kind of Japanese political class may adopt on this kind of far right movement, alongside the kind of march to this kind of far right nationalism that we're seeing in a lot of Western countries. Which, out of curiosity, because obviously I'm not too sort of read up on Japan, but when we're talking about their anti-immigration stance, which sort of groups are they, I suppose, which sort of groups do they kind of pose their sentiment against? Would it be just a lot of different kind of countries in the area, or the influx of that, or is it more just like a sort of preservation of traditional identity against all odds?
Yes, so it's interesting what you say there, because I think there can be an attraction to kind of projecting the rise of the far right in Europe onto Japan and other countries around the world, but I think it has quite an independent, maybe like political lineage. So Japan has always been a fervently nationalistic society, and also like a fervently imperial society. If you even think about war crimes committed by Japanese soldiers, like the rape of Manchuria, or also known as like the Nanjing massacre, among countless others, very much a nationalistic, neo-fascistic way of thinking. You know, in the past like 20 years, there's been years when Japan's taken no immigrants and these sorts of things. But at the same time, they've also put out a lot of global aid or international aid. So it's kind of a doctrine that is well within like Japanese psyche, but isn't one that I would compare, from my limited knowledge, let me also put it out there, to European immigration style sort of dog whistle politics.
Fair enough. No, that makes a lot of sense, because definitely you're right. There's definitely a different historical lineage, especially because there's a lot of trauma as well in the kind of post-war period that Japanese people have faced. But when we are at those kind of impasses where both of us have some sort of limited knowledge, you know what to do, stars them. Just get involved in the conversation, innit? But I'm sure we got a little Japanese kind of like expert go on in somewhere.
I think what's also interesting to think about this on the international stage is how this sort of consolidates the binary piecing up of the world, or maybe not even like frame it too cementedly as binary, but this is clearly an ally of Donald Trump, let's put it that way. And this will consolidate Donald Trump's strategy in the South China Sea and these sorts of things, while at the same time sort of putting sort of fly in the ointment to, let's say, European aims and aspirations in East Asia.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, as the world sort of shifts to that multipolar world, we're going to see a lot of these countries kind of move inward. So it's going to be very interesting to see, yeah, again, those similarities, but those similarities are not necessarily contingent on the same type of politics. I know that there's a sort of better story though, on the flip side of that. So not far right, but maybe on the left side of things. So maybe you want to take us
Yes.
there?
Yes, so in Portugal, Portugal recently had a presidential election. So the presidency in Portugal is largely ceremonial, but it does hold important powers, including a veto on certain legislation. They can dissolve parliament, and they have influence over national discourse. Also, the election itself sort of shows national sentiment. So they had a second round runoff, like head-to-head election between Antonio Jose Seguro, who is the centre-left, somewhat socialist candidate, and Andre Ventura, who is part of the Chega party, who, to put it crudely, follows sort of like that similar pattern of the rise of the far right around other parties in Europe. So fortunately, Antonio Jose Seguro won the presidency with around 67% of the vote, which was a decisive victory, obviously head-to-head, so Ventura only got 33% of the vote, if my maths is correct there. But what we're seeing there is an increase in the proportion of the vote for the Chega party, for the far right, but in this instance, not enough. This has been celebrated in a lot of, maybe let's call it centrist, socialist, centre-left media. But I also think that this just follows a similar pattern to what we've seen around Europe. There were times when people were celebrating in Italy, or even let's take it to Poland, where there was a centre-left or centrist sort of consolidation, and people saw it as like the last bastion of defeat of the far right. But all it was just 1 degree, sort of 1 degree delay. So in this sense, it's a good thing to be informed about, to understand that in Portugal they have consolidated sort of a centre-left presidency. But in fact, I'm far more sceptical about the long-term prospects for Portuguese politics.
But is that because you think that in the, I guess, the passion of celebration, they kind of just tend to brush under the rug that there is like a real rising nationalist sentiment and don't confront it head on? Is that kind of what you're alluding to?
Well, so fundamentally, I think centrism will not solve far-right extremism. That's the problem. Centrism will not solve
I
far-right
agree with that.
extremism.
So is he definitely like more centrist then versus the kind of on the
So
left wing
sometimes
side?
framed as socialism, but he is of like, as in, as far as my understanding, maybe we'll hear this and think that we're slandering his name, but from my understanding, he is of a neoliberal social dynamic. Let's put it that way.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what the Epstein files have shown, what recent kind of global politics has shown, is that the only way to win or take on the far right, so to speak, is to sort of meet them on their terms, but from the kind of symmetrical point, i.e., on the left. So I think that's why, like, for example, in the UK, what's going to play out is to see that our main sort of future of politics will be like a reform versus Greens. And that's because both of them can actually accept that there's something really wrong that has gone on in the last 20 years and actually can sort of meet this kind of discontentment and this kind of alienation, general alienation from politics, like head on and direct with everyday people.
Yeah.
But
So
then obviously,
the problem with the far right isn't the radicalism. We can put it that
yeah,
way.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. They have a right to feel radical. It's just around like the sort of prescription of the antidote is the problem. It's because the both of them diagnose it very well around what's happened. So I think the longer that we see centrism or like left centrism, if you want to call it that, as the thing that fights against the far right, so to speak, then I'm definitely in agreement with you. It's definitely not a sustainable solution because all
Yeah.
that will do long term is kind of build up more tension and more of like a sort of not to get I guess yeah it's gonna just there's gonna still feel like a contradiction
No,
within
I mean
society.
we've seen that in Italy with Meloni. We're seeing that with the rise of the AfD in Germany. We're going to see that with Marine Le Pen and Le Front National in France. It's just it's not the bulwark to far right extremism that they think it is.
And to be explicit as well, it's part of the problem is the fact that the kind of left centrists usually hold the state power and the kind of political whole power or the keys to that political structure that actually stops those, well, call it far left people from kind of stepping in and actually being able to
I mean, literally,
flourish.
the past 10 years of the Labour Party in the UK is the perfect example of that, where sort of the broadcast media, as well as the sort of right wing of the Labour Party, did everything within their power to scupper Jeremy Corbyn's chances, precisely because he was the bane of the Epstein class,
Yeah,
as
no,
we've now seen in
exactly.
the file releases.
And then that sort of pattern, it really does play out across Europe and Western politics. And so it's only until people get the self-awareness to realize that that can't continue, that only things will meaningfully change. And you would hope that now, out of all times in sort of modern history, um, people will acknowledge that. But yeah,
Yeah.
we'll wait and see.
Final story for the state of play coming out of Cuba. So people
Oh,
remember.
I've got one more after Cuba
Oh,
actually.
you do? Sorry,
But
pardon me, pardon me.
yeah, yeah.
So coming out of Cuba, so people remember at the start of the year, the US obviously captured Nicolas Maduro and essentially seized control of Venezuela's oil reserves. The reason why that is really, really problematic for Cuba, people would understand that Cuba as a socialist country has been under el bloqueo, the blockade or the embargo from the US for decades now, where certain resources and supplies are just banned from being imported into Cuba from countries that are allied with the US. So Venezuela, as a socialist state, was one of the only suppliers of oil to the Cuban government. Now, with the US having control of Venezuelan oil, they are starving, putting a further stranglehold on Cuban infrastructure and on the Cuban economy. What this means materially is that Cuba is literally running out of oil and cannot keep the lights on. So Cuba has started to turn back flights from tourists or even sort of supplies that are landing because they're informing the airlines that we can't refuel you when you land. Similarly, it also means that lights are going out in Havana and hospitals are coming off power. So I have friends in Cuba. My mum was recently in Cuba. She actually got tours around Havana from my friend. So I reached out to my mate Frank in Cuba, who lives in Havana, and he sort of said, like, right now, and this is quoting Frank, so right now in Cuba, after the incident in Venezuela, power outages have increased and buying gasoline is far more complicated. The common sense among Cubans is that we believe our government is holding diplomatic negotiations with the US government because it's a complicated situation that needs a solution, as it can't be allowed to escalate further. The Cuban people are already used to this way of acting by the US government, and that the actions of the US government are not new to the people of Cuba. I asked him as well if there was any like sort of negative sentiment increasing around the current Cuban government, because obviously we understand that a lot of these embargoes or tariffs are designed to foment disquiet among the domestic population for their government. But he said no, like people understand this is what the US does, this is how the US behaves, and all anger is sort of directed towards the United States.
Well, I think it's playing into Trump's master plan to basically, control that entire Western Hemisphere, that the entire Americas. I think it's very sad because again, I think it's very easy to just touch on these topics and kind of scroll past it, but there's real people's lives are being sort of threatened, their livelihoods are being threatened by again this international politics, especially because I guess it's when sort of Trump did this to Venezuela, people don't really consider those ramifications. This is a very real ramification. And the sad truth is, again, Trump is probably, knowing his past history and his government's past history, going to push them to the brink to concede some sort of control over that territory. And then again, the Trumpian politics is probably going to come in, swoop in, save the day. And actually, really, it's just some sort of corporatization of what is a very soulful and beautiful place.
I mean, that is the classic struggle with Cuba, is like the rejection of US corporatization is why it's now been on the sort of the brunt end of US
Subsistence as
international
well.
policy for the past 50 years. And I also think it's important for people on the left to recognize or to think about what's going on in Cuba right now. The first time I visited Cuba, I was like struck by the fact that this is such a country that holds such a pivotal position in the mindsets of sort of global young leftists. You go into like uni accommodation, you see like Che Guevara and stuff like that, and Fidel books and Cuban flags. But it's like people fail to think of at times like what's going on in Cuba right now. Like Cuba still exists in the modern day as a country that's struggling to survive.
And it's a country which has exported so many like wonderful things, and some of the best doctors in the world come from Cuba.
But you got to let them know your Cuban connection.
Uh, I even forget. Yeah, so my grandma on my dad's side was actually Cuban. She's born in Guantanamo. She actually fled when Castro came, so maybe she's not Marxist
Fairs.
either.
Fairs.
She's not Marxist either, innit? And she came to Trinidad. But yeah, that's a little piece of info for the start. I guess I'm technically called to Cuban.
Yeah, big up Bad Bunny as well. But you
Oh
want
yeah, I
to,
saw that. That was good. That was
yeah,
good.
yeah, yeah. Obviously he's
Didn't
Puerto
think
Rican,
that.
but he was shouting at all of the Americas.
Yeah.
Um, but do you want to get into the last topic for the state of play?
Yeah, definitely. So, Somalia, the land of El Kaf or Somaliland, depending on where
Nah, nah, nah,
people
nah. Big
place
up my
it.
Somalis.
Uh, so yeah, Somalia and Saudi Arabia have now signed a military cooperation memorandum of understanding to formalize defense ties. So the pact is intended to strengthen defense and military cooperation, covering multiple shared strategic interests, and both sides have provided quite a few specific details. So an MOU is basically just a formalization of intent on both sides. So there's no sort of contract signed just yet, but it's to say that, yeah, both Saudi Arabia and Somalia want to do this deal. And the timing overlaps with rising tensions, obviously, after Israel becomes the first country to recognize the breakaway region of Somaliland, a move which is strongly opposed by Somalia. So Somalia has recently cancelled all defense and security agreements with the UAE as well, sorry, reflecting the kind of shifting regional alignments. And some of the deal might include training, equipment support, and broader security cooperation to help Somalia protect that territorial integrity in the Red Sea. So very interesting things that we're seeing now. I think for a long while, post, I guess, 80s, 90s, Saudi Arabia, UAE were heavily sort of intertwined in terms of, having a sort of shared vision for that region and for that area. But now what we're seeing is the crumbling of that in, especially post 2015, 2018, even in the Epstein files, there's a suggestion that the UAE actually framed MBS for doing the Jamal Khashoggi killing. Obviously, who knows? It's all speculation, but it's definitely pointing to a wider trend that even within the Middle East, there's this battle and there's this struggle over basically who can actually have the greatest strategic influence over the region.
I think, and there's a lot of problems with democracy, yeah, but
Okay, great sentence starter.
that is just, bro, so many problems with democracy. Where do we start? But one thing I will say in defense of democracy is it maintains a consensus mechanism by which to obtain transparency, yeah. And a
Okay.
lot of times when I look at the behaviors of monarchies, especially in among the Gulf states and in West Asia, I think people fail to just address the fact that the overwhelming sense you get from the behaviors is obscurity and opacity. And this is an obvious downstream of the fact that there is no mechanism for transparency to be obtained by the civilian population. You know what I mean? So as much as we can talk about the New Deal relations between Somalia and Saudi Arabia, or the presentation of independence from Somaliland, it's like, and how that interacts with the UAE, or even the UAE's involvement in Sudan, I think we also need to address the fact that if we are not able to demand transparency about our government's interactions with these West Asian states, by no means can we offer like a sort of insightful comment.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. I think also yeah, I mean, it's definitely an insightful point around the useful or the utility of democracy, especially when sort of comparing to what's going on in these particular regions. I think the the trend though really is that for a lot of, I think for a lot of politics, really, it's kind of exposing that realpolitik that we talk about a lot, which is really the nature in which how international relations just really uses everyday people's livelihoods and people's experience as just pawns in some sort of wider game. Because ultimately, even the whole kind of Somaliland, Somalia conflict and that history, there's real claims to autonomy and self-determination from like both sides, right? By everyday people. And now Saudi Arabia coming in and just basically sort of picking a side, but not picking a side because they meaningfully believe in any sort of self-determination of Somali people, but rather they want to secure their interests over the Red Sea. And like because that Red Sea corridor, for example, determines around like 12 to 15% of like global trade and shipping routes, etc. So who knows? I feel like one of the things that I always do to really make sense of the maze and the corridors of kind of geopolitical decision making is work backwards and like, what is the intended outcome and what's in it for Saudi, what's in it for Somalia to really understand where people's yeah people's intent or countries' intentions lie.
Yeah, I think as well. Like whenever we're evaluating like political systems, I think, and obviously the US has fallen foul of a solution a problem that it came to solve. But we also need to think about where our checks and balances. Because if you don't have like sort of apposite checks and balances on executive power, then you are at the mercy of, as Donald Trump's basically said, their moral conscience.
Morality, yeah.
Yeah, and
No,
you have
definitely.
you have no recourse to address that or recourse to discipline as a civilian populace. But yeah, I think you know what as well, because there was only one topic that we are going to bring up in the back roads. I'll just throw it in the state of play, and then we'll get into a bit more of a casual, informal, friendly echo chamber.
Friendly, yeah. Not
Yeah,
hostile.
friend, not hostile. So the final one I wanted to bring to people's attention is the case of and sorry for my Nigerians at home if I butcher this, but the Enugu miners. So that is mining in the sense of coal mining. So in the past week, a Nigerian court has ruled that the British government must pay £420 million in compensation to the families of 21 coal miners who were shot and killed by colonial police in 1949 at the Eva Valley coal mine in Enugu, southeastern Nigeria. So what happened? In November 1949, these coal miners were striking, and this is while Nigeria was still under colonial rule, were striking for better working conditions, fairer pay, and improved safety. They were fired on, while unarmed, by colonial-era police while protesting. The shootings left 21 dead and scores of people injured, and they're widely seen by historians as a key moment that helped fuel Nigeria's movement towards independence in 1960. So the recent court ruling by the Enugu State High Court found that British colonial administration was legally responsible for the killings and the family should be compensated. And then the sum that they've amounted to is £20 million per family, which for the 21 families is £420 million. Obviously, there's a problem here with like legitimacy and legality and jurisdiction of the Enugu State Court. But I think it's important to just center that and highlight that to like reposition the horrors of colonialism and the horrors of British imperialism as recently as sort of 60 years ago, in a time when a lot of history trying to be rewritten and but Britain provided order and roads to these countries. No, it was a horrific totalitarian imperial racist regime.
Yeah, no, defo, and it's a really good recenter, and I think one of our most viral vids or shared vids was us just talking about our grandma's stories, like the fact that we are children of colonialism, we sort of bear the consequences of it, and many of us, the reason, like even if you're just kind of brushing shoulders with, and obviously it sounds trivial compared to obviously like the story that you brought up, but if you're just brushing shoulders with your age mates and all of a sudden they have like a bunch of savings, like just interrogate why the fact that like you don't,
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
yeah.
And how that is just tied to the fact that there is real historical legacies and lineages that we all come from. And for many of us, it has been quite literally altered by these horrific acts in the past. So I'm glad there's some sort of recognition, at least, of some sort of justice or there's some sort of formal push.
Yeah, but I would
to get
encourage
it.
people as well to like push beyond the national curriculum they might have been offered in the British in their British school system to look at the atrocities of Britain around Africa, because oftentimes it's like we know it was bad, but no, find the names of the movements and oftentimes the liberation movements, like, for example, the Mau Mau in Kenya. These kind of movements, yeah, all they were looking for was national self-determination, and how they were cruelly, brutally suppressed by the British government, who now wants to posture as, Paddington Bear and tea and crumpets. We're Britain. British Airways flights. No. There's a brutal authoritarian regime. That's the history of Britain.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it is a brutal authoritarian regime. Is also, I would encourage just looking into like the different um, legacies of colonialism as well. Because if you thought the British were bad, the Spanish were incredibly bad. The Belgian Congo, for example, as well, was horrific as
Japanese.
well. Yeah, no, well, there you go. But then I think it's also quite an interesting, I guess, intellectual exercise to compare what that type of colonialism was like and then understand what the kind of status quo discourse is around recognizing the past. Because actually, despite the fact that, yeah, by a lot of counts, the Spanish colonial regime was like one of the worst or one of the most violent and one of the most bloody, especially compared to the UK. There's a strong sort of sentiment and I guess push to recognize those horrors versus compared to the UK. And I find it like a just very interesting like difference in historical development.
No, I agree. We'll leave it there for the state of play today, and we'll get into an echo chamber where I kind of want to discuss recent Northstar developments, media response, and sort of political media.
Cool. Welcome back to the Echo Chamber. I think just because we're online and last week was a big episode for us and we got so many lovely comments, we wanted to reflect on last week, wanted to kind of address, I guess, some small controversies that popped up. And then also just be quite reflective around our experience being political commentators now, because we've sort of gone from the stage of this North Star thing being a nice hobby that me and Noah do to something that people really look at with real credibility and legitimacy. And also, to some extent, how can the stars them hold us to account to make sure that we're always going to be authentic political commentators? Because again, this is only going to continue to grow. And as it grows, we don't want our egos, so to speak, to take over. And we actually want it to feel like a real grassroots community project that was intended and set out to do. So the first thing, though, is just to kind of touch on some things from last week. And it was a bit of a different episode. We were very enraged by what we saw, and we wanted to kind of demonstrate that and show that. But also along along the way, we started to get some sort of accusations from people to say that perhaps we didn't handle an element of the Epstein files that delicately and insinuated some perhaps weird stuff. And what I'm talking about, we're dancing around right now, is this line around Jewish supremacy. Now, for me and Noah, and I guess for me as well, I've been outspoken against, Israel for a long time and elitism for a long time. And all we really did, what I think, was be really clear on the fact that within the Epstein files, right, there was these elites who spoke about using their Judaism in a very elite way, and actually that sort of conferring some sort of superiority over that particular group versus just the rest of us, the non-Jewish people. And simply pointing that out, whilst also caveating, by the way, any group of elite people do this with any ideology. It doesn't matter if Islam,
I think there was also the caveat that it's like these people are going to dehumanize along with different lenses. One of them, the most obvious, was the sexism, but also the racism, sort of racialization of Eastern European women, but then also the Jewish element.
Yeah, no, of course. And I suppose that because it is such a charged thing, it definitely can send even both of us in our own conversations into like a sort of spiral of self-reflection to say, wow, did we actually like misstep a line? Because that wasn't really our intentions. Like, did we do something wrong here? Because all we did was just read off a certain page. And I think, I don't know. I think like there's nothing that we really want to even sort of caveat now. It's just to say that we were very clear about what we meant. And if you have a problem with it, to be honest, I think it's on you versus on us in that particular stance. No, and maybe that's my Trinidadian coming out, but genuinely, I look back at it and I just thought, I don't know what's going on.
But you sound like your mum there. Said maybe that's your problem. But no, I think it's as I get it. Like I'm a black male, so you can't blackmail me. No, I'm a black man, so I understand the sentiment where it's like there are sensitive issues where maybe there's more of an emotional response. But I think it's also important to just address them as you see them. If we're going to try and restore a level of transparency to political discourse, a level of accountability to political discourse, then it's one, being open about exactly how you feel about something or exactly what you see and saying exactly what you see. But also the accountability element is like being open to being questioned and challenged on that, which we hope to always be that way. People remember last week, some of our discussion was motivated by correspondence we'd had with certain stars them who had reached out and wanted us to be a bit more direct on certain elements of our analysis. So we're open to hear that. Doesn't mean that, if you message us and say, talk about this, we're going to talk about that, but we're open to hearing that opinion and open to hearing that side of it. So I think it's been an interesting journey in the sense of developing our political commentary. But what I think is also important is, as much as, sometimes it's a bit of I heard a critique offered a few weeks ago about streaming culture, whereby sort of streamers are just beholden to the chat, W's in the chat sort of thing. And I think it's a delicate dance to play as a political commentator, whereby you want to offer a sincere and subjective but independent analysis, but at the same time you're aware of the need to sort of feed the audience. And what we're trying to develop, and maybe we can go a bit behind the scenes here, when me and Sean were first curating the idea for Northstar, what we wanted to develop is not necessarily a following, but a group of people that engage with our content who trusted our analysis rather than necessarily always agreed with it, which I think is more important.
Yeah, and I think even to like kind of privilege, or just draw out some sort of like Islamic philosophy behind it. Like we actually just have very genuine, sincere intentions with this. Like the project is not to kind of like privilege ourselves and sort of cast ourselves as some sort of like genius political commentators. It's the fact that no, we have real experience, we have some sort of academic background, and we thought there was a real gap in political commentary, and that's why we're here. That's what we're here to do. And so, I think there's an element of also being authentic. Like we're not here to not be ourselves, and actually sometimes our views that we do hold and that which we try to honestly communicate on this show might be upsetting or might be something that you disagree with, and that's fine. I think like we can, so long as we can disagree agreeably, not to kind of sound like the kind of restless politics people, then I think that's the kind of like respectful environment we want to build. But I think it becomes very dangerous both for the authenticity of the content you consume, and also for the authenticity of oneself to basically enter a relationship where they're just subservient to their viewers,
Yeah,
and
or vice
subservient,
versa.
yeah, or vice versa. Because again, um, it's especially on in this online world, uh, your credibility is obviously directly flows from the people who support you. But then I think in the nature of politics, support shouldn't always be lended to people who just completely agree with everything you say. And I think it's very important to kind of be
But
very explicit
even
about that.
even to ground that, that's how you end up having governments in power like we do today, where their opinions flip flop with polling. You know,
Yeah.
they just focus group a new idea, and it's like irrespective of whether that holds up with an overarching ideology they might have. Oh, let's just go with what the focus group says.
Yeah.
Whereas what we're trying to develop here is a more thicker ethical structure.
But on the flip side, the implication then, therefore, is that we're so fine to say we were wrong as well, because
Yeah.
we're not wedded to just being right. That's not the end goal. The goal of the
I
North
mean,
Star Project is
sometimes
to
I
work.
think you're divorced from being right. Like,
Good one, nice. But it's about working things out in real time, and I think so long as we continue to do that, like I'm sorry, like no sort of accusation that we're insinuating things or being too conspiracy theory-esque, etc., in the face of the fact that we want to bring justice to a certain conversation, is going to make us forget that.
yeah, no, of course.
Which
Yeah.
no, Karen, you go.
No, I was going to say, I think at this point, I love this point in the podcast because like you only got the real stars them listening. So I just want to say, like, stars them,
Everyone's switched off.
don't even. I forgot to shout the guy out, but someone actually reached out to me saying you should talk about the Cuba stuff as well. So keep reaching out, keep messaging us, all that kind of jazz, and just remember, like the only thing we need from you guys is just make sure you just like. Drop a little comment just for the algorithm, and then go to Spotify and review us. Because me and Sean were looking at Spotify reviews, and we're doing so well. Like we've got like 185-star reviews, and me, I'm a real podcast listener, so that means more to me. Like when I see a podcast and it's got like a good review and like amount of review rate, you know it's 30. So that one means more to me.
No, defo. But as always, keep leaving your feedback as well, because we do read that. Trust me, we be reading everything, all the comments, and it really helps us, I guess, grow as well. Because I think, yeah, we're growing up as well. I mean, I'm 25 now. Maybe I've reached unk age, but this is an endeavor and a project that we hope to grow. And as we grow it, we're also going to grow in our own opinions and the way we do this. And yeah, we're just very, very grateful for that journey so far because it's only been a short journey. It's only been like around 2, 3 months.
Facts. Is
Yeah.
there before we go, is there anything you want to recommend to the stars, them stuff they need to be looking out for?
Not so I'm gonna recommend something that I haven't seen myself, but
Oh
apparently
yeah,
there's
yeah.
a yeah, not apparently there is a new film out.
This comes from our producer Tarek.
Yeah, but I definitely want to go watch it. It's the voice of Hind Rajab,
Yeah,
which was the sweet little angel who was killed,
yeah.
um, and in Gaza by the IDF. She was trapped in a car. Her family died, and she called the Red Crescent and the emergency helpline to basically say that she's really scared and she wanted people to come and rescue her. That story breaks my heart every single time. I think that's probably the top story that sticks with me amongst all the kind of traumatic things that I've heard from the whole kind of genocide. And I heard it's really good. I don't know, I've heard some sort of critiques that it's like it might feel a bit like trauma porn as well. So I kind of need to do my own research, but
It is always a delicate line, a bit of a
yeah.
trade off in like actually trying to like center and highlight someone's traumatic experience versus, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I just hope like some sort of the profits or whatever are literally going towards Palestine. If it's not, then it's going to be kind of problematic. But let me know if anyone's seen it below. That'll be quite good in the comments, etc.
Well, you're not trying to shout out the J. Cole album.
Bro, why? Because back in the day, I used to be the biggest J. Cole fan ever.
I can't lie, like, big up J. Cole, yeah. Like, I'm sure, you know this as well, because of our demographic, I'm sure a lot of the stars them are listening to the J. Cole album. I tried, man. I tried. But yeah.
Now, his old stuff's really good, though, but I don't know about his new stuff.
He's never really been for me, I can't lie. I want to recommend, I've tried to recommend it to you as well, but no, I tried to send them out all my friends here. No one's trying to watch this. The Night Manager series, BBC series. They dropped their second season last week. I watched the first season on the plane. I watched the second season when I touched down. Quality. Tom Hiddleston, you are a guy. You're a serious guy. So that's my recommendation for the stars them this week. It's not particularly intellectual, but it's just a very good series.
Fair. Well, anyways, next week we're back in the studio. We still haven't really done some sort of design work, so let us know if you have any thoughts around there. But we are about to. I'm excited. Our first big in a couple weeks' time.
I can't even lie. Look at that. Just the start of the episode, end of the episode, the Wi-Fi has just killed you off. So, you know what, yeah, just leave the outro to me. So, stars them. We are going to be back in person. You won't have to hear us stuttering and stammering because of the algorithm. Next week, we'll be back in person next week with a big episode for you. And over the next few weeks and next few months, we have a lot of guests coming down to East London for the stars them. They want to chat to you. They want to give their opinions for you. So we're looking forward to that. But until next time, be safe.